At 5:30 in the morning, a father wakes up inside a cruise ship cabin. The ocean is calm. The ship is silent. And just a few feet away from him, his daughter is lying on a chair on the balcony. He can see her legs. He knows she's there. He goes back to sleep. 30 minutes later, she's gone. No scream. No struggle. No trace. And what makes this even more disturbing is this. She didn't disappear in a city. She didn't vanish on a road. She disappeared from a cruise ship. A place where you are not supposed to just vanish. This is the story of Amy Lynn Bradley. And nearly 3 decades later, no one knows what really happened to her. Amy Bradley was not the type of person you would expect to just disappear. She was strong, confident, athletic, a trained lifeguard who knew how to handle water better than most people on that ship. She had just graduated from university. She had plans, a new job waiting for her when she returned home, a future that was already beginning to take shape. This trip was supposed to be a celebration, a family cruise, a reward, something simple, something joyful. On March 21st, 1998, Amy boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas with her family. Her father, Ron, her mother, Iva, and her younger brother, Brad. It was supposed to be a normal vacation. But from the beginning, something about it didn't sit right with Amy. She had a fear of heights, and being surrounded by open ocean on a massive ship made her uneasy. Still, she went. Because her family was there. Because it was supposed to be safe. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. They explored the ship. They relaxed. They enjoyed the atmosphere. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that would hint at what was coming. Then came the night before she disappeared. March 23rd. The night everything changed. Amy and her brother Brad went to a late-night party on the ship. A disco on the ninth deck. Music, lights, drinks, people dancing. It was the kind of environment where everyone lets their guard down, where strangers become temporary friends, where time moves differently. That night, Amy was seen dancing with members of the ship's band. One of them stood out, a man known as Yellow. His real name was Alistair Douglas. Multiple witnesses saw them together, talking, drinking, dancing closely. Nothing overtly alarming, but enough to be remembered later. Hours passed. The party slowly began to fade. Around 3:35 a.m., Brad returned to the cabin. 5 minutes later, Amy followed. That detail is important, because the ship's electronic system recorded it. 3:40 a.m. Amy Bradley was alive. She was back in her room. She had made it safely. Brad later said they sat together on the balcony, talking, relaxing, just siblings having a quiet moment after a long night. Then Brad went to sleep. Amy stayed outside, alone. That was the last confirmed moment anyone in her family saw her. Sometime between 5:15 and 5:30 a.m., her father woke up. He checked on his children. Brad was asleep. Amy was outside, still on the balcony, lying on a chair, exactly where she had been before. He saw her. He was sure of it. He could see her legs clearly. There was no panic, no concern, just a normal moment. So he went back to sleep. That decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. Because when he woke up again, around 6:00 a.m., Amy was gone. Not missing from another room. Not somewhere on the ship. Gone. From a space that had only one exit. A balcony. Over open ocean. At first, there was confusion. Maybe she went for a walk. Maybe she went to get food. Maybe she met someone. But something didn't feel right. Because Amy was not the type to just leave without saying anything. Her cigarettes were gone. Her lighter too. Small details, but important ones. It suggested she left on her own. At least at first. Her father began searching the ship. Decks. Hallways. Public areas. Anywhere she might be. Nothing. By 6:30 a.m., the entire family knew. Amy was missing. And this is where things start to become troubling. The family immediately alerted the ship's crew. They asked for help. They begged them to make an announcement. To stop passengers from leaving. To lock things down. Because if Amy was still on the ship, time mattered. Every minute mattered. But the response they got was not what you would expect. They were told it was too early. That announcements couldn't be made yet. That procedures had to be followed. Think about that. A 23-year-old woman is missing on a ship in the middle of the ocean. And the response is, wait. By the time an announcement was finally made, many passengers had already disembarked. If Amy had been taken, if she had been let off that ship, that delay could have been the difference between finding her and losing her forever. And that is one of the biggest criticisms of this case. Because in a controlled environment like a cruise ship, the first hour is everything. And that hour was lost. As the search began, more details started to emerge, and some of them didn't make sense. Multiple witnesses claimed they saw Amy on the upper deck later that morning, between 5:30 and 5:45 a.m., with the same band member, Alistair Douglas. They said he handed her a drink, a dark-colored liquid. Then, they saw him leave alone. That detail raised immediate suspicion, because if Amy was with him, where did she go? And why was he the last person seen with her? When questioned, he denied any involvement. He said he left the party earlier. He said he didn't know what happened. He even took a polygraph test. And reportedly, he passed. But something didn't sit right with the family. Brad, Amy's brother, later said something that stood out. Shortly after Amy disappeared, before any public announcement had been made, Douglas approached him and said, "I'm sorry to hear about your sister." That moment changed everything. Because how did he know? No one had announced it yet. No one had told him. So how did he know she was missing? That question has never been fully answered, and it became one of the first real cracks in the official story. Because up until that point, this could have been an accident, a fall, a tragic mistake. But now, there was another possibility, that Amy didn't just disappear, that something happened to her, and someone knew more than they were saying. As the ship continued its journey, the search expanded. Authorities were notified. Coast guards were deployed. Helicopters scanned the ocean. Ships retraced paths. For 4 days, they searched. Nothing. No body. No evidence. No confirmation that she had gone overboard. And that's what makes this case so disturbing. Because even if someone falls into the ocean, there is usually something. But here, there was nothing. Just questions. And one terrifying realization. Amy Bradley had vanished. From a place where disappearing should have been impossible. And that was only the beginning. What should have been a controlled search inside a floating city quickly turned into something far more chaotic. After Amy Bradley was reported missing, the expectation was simple. Seal the ship, search every inch, question everyone immediately. But that is not what happened. The delay in making an announcement meant that hundreds of passengers had already begun leaving the vessel as it prepared to dock in Curaçao. In a situation where every second mattered, time had already slipped away. By the time the crew broadcasted a call for Amy to report to the purser's desk, the opportunity to contain the situation had been compromised. This single delay would later become one of the most heavily criticized aspects of the entire case. Because if Amy had still been on board, the window to find her alive may have already closed. The search that followed was thorough in appearance, but many believe it lacked urgency at the beginning. Crew members checked cabins, storage areas, hallways, and public spaces. Staff members questioned other employees and attempted to retrace Amy's movements from the night before. Yet despite being on a massive ship surrounded entirely by ocean, there was no clear indication of where she had gone. No signs of a struggle, no witness accounts that definitively explained her disappearance, and no physical evidence left behind. Everything about the situation felt incomplete. Outside the ship, authorities launched a large-scale search effort across the surrounding waters. The Netherlands Antilles Coast Guard deployed helicopters, radar-equipped aircraft, and patrol boats. They retraced the ship's route, scanning the ocean surface and nearby currents for any sign of a body or debris. For 4 days, they searched relentlessly. But again, nothing was found. Not even the smallest clue that Amy had fallen overboard. This absence of evidence created a problem for investigators. If she had accidentally fallen into the sea, there should have been something, an item, a sighting, a trace. The fact that there was none forced them to consider other possibilities, even if they could not prove them. Inside the ship, attention turned back to the people Amy had interacted with during her final hours. The most significant of these was Alistair Douglas, the band member known as Yellow. Witnesses had seen him with Amy late into the night, dancing and talking at the disco. More importantly, multiple people claimed they saw the two of them together again in the early morning hours, after Amy had already returned to her cabin. According to these witnesses, Amy and Douglas were seen near the upper deck between 5:30 and 5:45 a.m., a critical window of time that overlapped with when her father last saw her on the balcony. What made these accounts more troubling was the detail that Douglas had allegedly handed Amy a drink. This suggested continued interaction long after the party had ended. If these sightings were accurate, it meant Amy had left the safety of her cabin and rejoined someone she had only met hours earlier. That decision, if voluntary, raised questions about her state of mind. Had she been intoxicated? Was she comfortable with him? Or had something else influenced her actions? When investigators questioned Douglas, he denied any involvement in Amy's disappearance. He stated that he had left the party earlier and had no further interaction with her afterward. Despite the witness statements, he maintained that he did not know what happened to her. He cooperated with authorities and agreed to take a polygraph test, which he reportedly passed. Officially, this reduced suspicion against him, but it did not eliminate it entirely. Polygraph tests are not definitive proof of truth, and in cases like this, doubt often lingers even when results appear favorable. Amy's family, especially her brother Brad, found it difficult to fully trust Douglas's account. Brad recalled the moment Douglas approached him after Amy had gone missing, offering sympathy before any announcement had been made. The timing of that interaction was unsettling. It suggested that Douglas knew something was wrong before the situation had been made public. Whether that knowledge came from rumor, observation, or something more direct was never clarified. But to the family, it felt like a detail that could not be ignored. As the investigation continued, other unusual elements began to surface. One of them involved a waiter on the ship who had shown an unusual level of interest in Amy. According to her family, this waiter had repeatedly asked them to pass a note to her, inviting her to meet him for drinks once the ship reached port. At the time, it seemed harmless, even common behavior in a social environment like a cruise. But after Amy disappeared, it became another thread in a web of unanswered questions. Could multiple individuals have been paying attention to her? Could someone have taken advantage of her in a moment when she was alone? Another detail that disturbed the family was the absence of photographs. Cruise ships typically document passengers extensively, capturing moments throughout the journey to sell as souvenirs. Yet when Amy's family went to look for photos of her from the trip, they found none available. It was as if her presence had been erased from that aspect of the experience. While there could be innocent explanations for this, such as technical issues or oversight, the timing made it feel suspicious. In a case already filled with uncertainty, even small inconsistencies took on greater significance. Meanwhile, the theory that Amy had fallen overboard remained the official position for some investigators. It was the simplest explanation. A young woman, possibly intoxicated, alone near the edge of a ship, could have slipped or lost her balance. But this theory had problems. Amy was not only a strong swimmer, but also someone with lifeguard training. She was comfortable around water and aware of risks. Additionally, there were no signs that she had climbed or leaned over the railing. There were no witnesses who saw her fall, and no physical evidence supported the idea. For her family, this explanation felt insufficient. It did not match who Amy was or how she behaved. Another possibility that began to gain attention was that Amy had not fallen into the ocean at all. Instead, she may have left the ship voluntarily or been taken off it. The delay in the announcement and the lack of immediate containment made this scenario plausible. If she had disembarked while the ship was docking, she could have entered a completely different environment where tracking her would become significantly more difficult. Curaçao, with its busy port and constant flow of people, could have provided the perfect setting for someone to disappear without being noticed. This idea gained more weight as witness reports began to emerge in the weeks and months following her disappearance. Some individuals claimed they had seen a woman matching Amy's description on the island shortly after the ship arrived. One of the earliest reports came from a taxi driver who said he saw her running through a parking area, appearing distressed and searching for a phone. He claimed he remembered her eyes, a detail that stood out because of their distinct green color. While this account could not be verified, it introduced a new possibility that Amy had made it off the ship alive. The investigation now faced a complex situation with multiple competing theories and no definitive evidence. Every lead seemed to open another question rather than provide an answer. Was Amy a victim of an accident, lost to the ocean without a trace? Was she taken by someone she encountered during the cruise? Or had she somehow left the ship on her own, entering a chain of events that no one could fully understand? As days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, the lack of progress became more painful. For Amy's family, The uncertainty was the hardest part. There was no closure, no confirmation of what had happened, only a series of possibilities that refused to resolve into a clear narrative. The investigation had moved beyond the initial search phase and into something far more difficult, trying to reconstruct a story without enough pieces. And as more time passed, the case began to shift from a missing person investigation into something deeper, something more disturbing. Because the longer Amy remained missing without evidence of death, the more one question refused to go away. What if she was still alive? As the immediate search efforts ended and the cruise ship case faded from headlines, the investigation into Amy Bradley's disappearance entered a far more unsettling phase. Without a body, without confirmed evidence of an accident, and without a definitive suspect, the case began to rely heavily on reported sightings and fragments of information that surfaced in the months and years that followed. Each new lead brought a surge of hope, only to dissolve into uncertainty. Yet some of these accounts were so specific, so vivid, that they refused to be ignored. One of the earliest reported sightings came just weeks after Amy disappeared. When her family traveled to Curaçao to continue searching for answers, they were approached by a local taxi driver. He claimed that on the day the cruise ship docked, he saw a young woman matching Amy's description running frantically through a parking area and near the port. According to him, she appeared distressed, almost panicked, and was looking for a telephone. What stood out most to the driver was her eyes. He described them as bright green, a detail that matched Amy perfectly and was not commonly seen. The driver insisted he remembered her clearly, not just because of her appearance, but because of the urgency in her behavior. However, despite the specificity of his account, investigators were unable to verify it. There was no additional evidence, no surveillance footage, and no other witnesses who could confirm what he saw. Still, the idea that Amy might have been alive and off the ship that morning began to take hold. Then, in August of that same year, another sighting emerged, one that would become one of the most haunting in the entire case. Two Canadian divers, visiting a beach in Curaçao known as Playa Porto Marie, reported seeing a woman they believed was Amy. They described her as being in the company of two men who appeared aggressive and controlling. According to one of the divers, the woman stood out immediately. She had the same physical build, the same hair, and the same distinctive green eyes. At one point, she made eye contact with him and seemed to react when she heard him speaking English. The diver later said that it felt like she was trying to communicate without drawing attention to herself. But before anything more could happen, one of the men stepped in, guiding her away toward a nearby bar. What made this sighting particularly disturbing was the proximity. The divers claimed they were only a few feet away from her, close enough to notice details, close enough to feel certain. One of them later said he was haunted by the encounter, convinced that he had seen Amy and that she was not free. When he eventually saw her photograph on a television program about missing persons, he immediately recognized her. He contacted her family and even traveled to meet them in person, standing by his account. Yet once again, investigators were unable to substantiate the claim. There was no physical evidence linking Amy to that location, and no way to identify the men described by the witnesses. As time went on, more reports surfaced, each one adding another layer of mystery. In January 1999, nearly a year after Amy disappeared, a U.S. Navy petty officer named William Hefner came forward with a startling story. He claimed that while visiting a brothel in Curaçao, he encountered a woman who identified herself as Amy Bradley. According to Hefner, the woman approached him and quietly asked for help. She told him she was being held against her will and needed someone to contact her family. Hefner described her as nervous, aware of her surroundings, and careful with her words. He said she explained that she had been on a cruise, had gone ashore looking for drugs, and had been trapped ever since. Hefner did not report the encounter immediately. He later explained that he was afraid of the consequences for his military career, given where the interaction took place. It was not until years later, after he had retired, that he reached out to Amy's family and shared what he had experienced. His conviction was strong. He believed without doubt that the woman he met was Amy. The FBI investigated his claims, but by that time, the brothel he described had burned down, eliminating any possibility of gathering physical evidence. Once again, the case was left with a compelling story but no way to prove it. Around this same period, Another development occurred that would deeply affect Amy's family, not because it brought them closer to the truth, but because it exploited their hope. A man named Frank Jones contacted the Bradley family, claiming to be a former military operative with access to a team capable of locating and rescuing Amy. He told them that his group had identified her being held in a guarded compound by armed individuals. He provided details about her tattoos and even relayed personal information that seemed convincing. Over time, he continued to update the family, building their trust and reinforcing the belief that Amy was alive and could be brought home. Driven by desperation and hope, the family provided Jones with large sums of money to fund the supposed rescue operation. In total, they sent him hundreds of thousands of dollars. They waited for the call that would tell them their daughter had been found. But that call never came. Eventually, it was revealed that Jones had fabricated the entire story. He had no team, no information, and no intention of helping. He had taken advantage of a family's pain for financial gain. He was later charged with fraud and sentenced to prison, but the damage had already been done. The experience left the Bradleys not only devastated, but also more cautious about future leads, even those that might have been genuine. Despite the growing skepticism, sightings continued. In 2003, witnesses in San Francisco reported seeing a woman who closely resembled Amy in the company of two men. They claimed the woman appeared distressed and gave them a pleading look before being led away. The witnesses were certain enough to contact authorities immediately, and composite sketches of the men were created based on their descriptions. Yet, as with previous reports, there was no way to confirm that the woman they saw was indeed Amy. The trail once again went cold. Then, in 2005, another account surfaced, this time from a woman in Barbados. She claimed to have encountered a woman in a department store restroom who quietly told her that her name was Amy. According to the witness, the woman was accompanied by several men who were discussing what sounded like an illegal transaction. The witness described the interaction as brief but intense, noting that the woman seemed fearful and constrained. Authorities took the report seriously enough to create sketches based on the description, but like so many other leads, it could not be verified. Each of these sightings painted a similar picture. A young woman, resembling Amy Bradley, seen in unfamiliar environments, often in the presence of men, often appearing distressed. None of the accounts could be proven, but together they formed a pattern that was difficult to ignore. They suggested a possibility that went beyond accident or suicide, a possibility that Amy had been taken, moved, and possibly controlled in ways that made escape nearly impossible. This idea was reinforced by another disturbing element that emerged years later. Photographs began circulating online of a woman who bore a strong resemblance to Amy. In the images, the woman appeared to be involved in sex work. Using the name Jazz, her expression was described as empty, disconnected, and deeply unhappy. Experts were unable to definitively confirm whether the woman in the photographs was Amy, but some believed the similarities were too strong to dismiss. For her family, the images were both horrifying and heartbreaking. They suggested a fate far worse than death, a life of exploitation and isolation. As the years passed, the case remained open but unresolved. The official theories continued to focus on three main possibilities: accidental fall, voluntary disappearance, or abduction. Each theory had its supporters and its flaws. The idea of an accident lacked evidence. The idea of voluntary disappearance did not align with Amy's personality or her plans for the future. And the idea of abduction, while supported by some of the sightings, could not be proven without concrete evidence. What remained constant was the uncertainty. Every lead, every sighting, every theory brought with it a mix of hope and frustration. For Amy's family, the question was not just what happened, but whether she was still out there somewhere, waiting to be found. And as more time passed without answers, that question only became more difficult to bear. As the years passed, the case of Amy Bradley stopped being just a missing person story and became something much more unsettling. Because unlike most disappearances, Amy didn't just vanish. She vanished from a place where escape is almost impossible. A cruise ship in the middle of the ocean. No roads, no exits, no way out, unless something very unusual happened. And that's why, even decades later, people are still asking the same question. What really happened to Amy Bradley? The official explanation has always leaned toward one possibility. that Amy fell overboard. An accident. A tragic mistake. A young woman, possibly tired, possibly disoriented, stepping too close to the edge, losing her balance, and disappearing into the ocean below. On the surface, it sounds reasonable. Cruise ship accidents do happen. People fall. People slip. And sometimes, they are never found. But in Amy's case, that explanation doesn't sit right. Not with her family. Not with many investigators. And not with people who have studied the details closely. Because Amy wasn't just any passenger. She was a trained lifeguard. A strong swimmer. Someone who understood water, danger, and balance better than most. And more importantly, there was no evidence. No splash reported. No witnesses. No items found floating. No signs she had climbed or leaned over the railing. Nothing. In most overboard cases, there is at least something. A shoe. A sighting. A moment someone remembers. But here, there was silence. And silence, in a case like this, is suspicious. Then there's the timeline. Amy was seen on the balcony at around 5:30 a.m. Her father saw her. He was certain. 30 minutes later, she was gone. That means whatever happened to her happened in a very small window. And during that same window, multiple witnesses claim they saw her somewhere else on the ship, with another person. So now the accident theory starts to weaken. Because if she left the balcony, if she went somewhere else, then she didn't fall from there. Which raises another question. If she didn't fall, did she leave? And if she left, did she go willingly? Or was she taken? This is where the second theory comes in. That Amy didn't fall into the ocean. She left the ship, or was taken off it. At first, this sounds unlikely. Cruise ships are controlled environments. Passengers are tracked. Crew members are monitored. Security exists. But the reality is, it's not as airtight as people think, especially in the late 1990s, and especially when the ship is docking, because that's when movement increases. People are preparing to leave. Crew members are busy. Attention is divided. And remember, there was a delay in announcing Amy's disappearance. By the time the ship made the announcement, many passengers had already disembarked, which means if Amy had been taken off the ship during that time, no one would have stopped it. No one would have known. And once she was off the ship, she was no longer in a controlled environment. She was in Curaçao, a busy port, a place where tourists, locals, and workers mix together, a place where someone could disappear very easily. And this is where the sightings become important, because multiple people claim they saw her after the ship docked. Not once, not twice, but several times, in different locations, different years, different countries, always the same pattern. A woman who looked like Amy, with men, often appearing uncomfortable, sometimes appearing controlled. The diver sighting, the brothel encounter, the department store restroom, the San Francisco report. Individually, each one can be dismissed. But together, they create a pattern. And that pattern points to something far more disturbing. That Amy may not have died that morning. That she may have been taken and kept. This leads to the third theory, the most unsettling one. Human trafficking. The idea that Amy was targeted, watched, followed, and then removed from the ship. Not randomly, not accidentally, but intentionally. Supporters of this theory point to several details. The band member who was seen with her, the witnesses who saw her being given a drink, the suspicious timing of his statements, the waiter who showed unusual interest, the missing photographs, the delay in the announcement, and the sightings that suggest she may have been alive afterward. All of these elements start to form a different kind of story, one where Amy didn't just disappear. She was selected and taken. But even this theory has its problems, because there is still no proof, no confirmed location, no verified sighting, no evidence that can be traced directly back to her, just fragments. And that's what makes this case so difficult. Every theory has holes. Every explanation leaves questions unanswered, and none of them fully explain everything. Even the trafficking theory, as compelling as it is, relies heavily on unconfirmed sightings. And while those sightings are detailed, they cannot be proven, which leaves us with something unsettling. A case that has possibilities, but no answers. And then there's one more element, something that makes this case even more disturbing. The idea that someone on that ship knows exactly what happened. Because think about it. Amy didn't vanish into thin air. She was somewhere, at some point, with someone. And that someone either saw something or knows something. But for whatever reason, that information has never come out. Maybe it was missed. Maybe it was ignored. Maybe it was hidden. But it's out there. Somewhere. And that's what keeps this case alive. Because unlike cases where evidence clearly points in one direction, this one doesn't. It sits in a space between possibilities. Between accident and intention. Between loss and control. Between death and survival. And that uncertainty is what makes it so powerful. Years after Amy disappeared, her family continued searching. They went on television, spoke to investigators, followed leads, chased every possible clue. Because for them, this was never just a case. It was their daughter, their sister, their family. And without a body, without confirmation, they were left with one question. Is she still alive? That question changes everything. Because if she is, then somewhere, she is still waiting. Waiting to be found. Waiting to be recognized. Waiting for someone to believe her story. And if she isn't, then what happened to her is still unknown. Which means whoever was responsible was never caught. And that's the part that doesn't sit right. Because in a place like a cruise ship, with cameras, with staff, with systems in place, someone should have seen something. Someone should have known something. But nothing ever came forward. Nothing that could solve the case. And that's why, even today, Amy Bradley's disappearance remains one of the most mysterious cases ever. Not because it's complicated, but because it's incomplete. A story with no ending. A moment frozen in time. A balcony. A quiet morning. A father who looked out and saw his daughter. Safe. And then, gone. No goodbye. No explanation. No trace. Just a mystery that refuses to be solved. And maybe the most disturbing part of all is this. Someone somewhere knows exactly what happened that morning, and they've never said a word. So now the question is not just what happened to Amy Bradley. The question is, if she didn't fall, if she didn't leave, then who took her?